That's my territory, is the overlap between all these events, the Kennedy assassination, Watergate, Iran-Contra, and above all, 9/11. And 9/11, we know it was part of the commission report that a plan called Continuity of Government Planning, which was originally to establish like a second government if there was an atomic attack that wiped out Washington, you would have a second government in place inside mountains, or, Camp Dietrich, I think it is. I became very keen in continuity of government planning. It was planned for, it changed its mission under Reagan, and it was no longer against an atomic attack, but just planning for emergencies. And it was officially invoked for the first time on 9/11, at a time which, according to the COG plans themselves, the president and the vice president could not be in the same city. So that meant that Cheney took over and ran it for those days, together with Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of Defense, which is very interesting because for 20 years, Rumsfeld and Cheney had been planning the COG plan, even though for a while one of them was not in the government at all. And for the rest of the time, neither of them were in the government. They were planning for what a newspaperman accurately summarized as a suspension of the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. And then, of course, Oliver North was queried about this in Iran-Contra hearings, and said, "Is it true you were planning for the suspension of the U.S. Constitution?" And instead of getting an answer, you got a Democratic chairman banging his gavel saying, "We cannot go into that in a public session," which means, in effect, yes, he was. And I don't want to get totally sidetracked here, but North used that. He used what they themselves called the Doomsday Network, a second network. And it's everywhere now. Most people don't know it was invoked on January the 6th, when Trump hoped to take over. And the National Guard took forever to come, and the FBI was able to arrest all these people. All that time, there were sniper squads put in place under 9/11, and I don't want to talk about that because I'm glad they were there, and I'm glad that for once I was on the same side as what I would call the deep state. All right, now, but this is a paper, and I'm going to just read the beginning of it, and it involves a lot about Northwoods and the possibility that Kennedy was assassinated by a spin-off conspiracy that was really planted on top of the Northwoods. I wrote it back in I think it was 2005. Yes, 2005. 3 years later, I wrote a book about big similarities between the Kennedy assassination and 9/11, and I listed 15, but I didn't list the biggest one of all, which was that in both cases the planning involved the secret network, the second network outside government that I'll call COG. It changes its name all the time. You may have seen just in the last few weeks somebody wrote in about the plot to kill Kennedy's sister. How many people saw that? Did anyone see it?
No, I didn't hear it, no.
Well, it was one of the many emails we've been getting recently, and it excited me because it was all coming from DIA using Critic, and it was quite obvious that Critic in those emails was the second network. All right, let me get focused here, and this is what I really have to say. The aim of the following paper is to show connections between a right-wing extremist, Joseph Miltier, I hope everyone's heard of Miltier, what he predicted about the Kennedy assassination and related machinations to falsely implicate in the assassination a Cuban called Paulino Sierra Martinez, whom I interviewed for hours, who had been working on anti-Castro matters with Robert Kennedy's friend Enrique Ruiz Williams. I'll say very briefly, he, in 1963, the crucial year, Kennedy has reached an agreement with Khrushchev. There will be no more Cuban raids on Cuba that originate in the United States. And so he asked all the Cuban groups to move to Costa Rica or Venezuela, and some, like Martima, go willingly, and some absolutely refused to go. And on the contrary, Alpha 66 has a raid on a Soviet ship in Havana Harbor. So obviously these are not friendly to Kennedy, these people. How are you going to get rid of them? And the plan was to have Paulino Sierra set up a government of Cuba in exile. Money came, I don't know from where, to pay these people to leave. And then right after let me read a bit further. Having accurately, this is back to Miltier, having accurately predicted how the president would be killed, which was from a sharpshooter in a high building, Miltier made a second prediction that there would be, and this is a quote, what he's revealing to a police undercover agent before the assassination, there would be a propaganda campaign put on to prove to the Christian people of the world that the Jews, the Zionist Jews, had murdered Kennedy. And that went public in the March issue of the John Birch Society bulletin, where there was Ravilo Oliver gave a long denunciation of the Jews. But it happened secretly immediately after, but it was set up before the assassination and implemented later. And the man who set it up really was Richard Kane, who we think of as a man who was involved in Mexico with the surveillance of the bugging of the various embassies. It's acknowledged that he bugged the Czech embassy in Mexico City. It's pretty clear, I think, that he also was involved with the Lee Temple. But Kane was involved in blackening the name of Sierra, and he did so after a CIA agent flew out in September, this is before the assassination, to confer with Kane. And what happened right after the assassination, somebody reported in to the Secret Service that Sierra was with a group who said, our secret backers are Jews. And that, of course, was what Miltier had predicted, and it happened right away. And so we're very interested in who told this story. What we know for a certainty is that somebody flew out from the agency in Langley to confer with Kane in September. And I'm just going to read you the end of my paper. I did not know when I wrote this back in 2005 about the third Northwoods, which was instituted in 1963, the crucial year where there must be no harassment from America of Cuba. And I put it in my book, Dallas 63. This is under Maxwell Taylor. And Maxwell Taylor Kennedy thought of him as a friend, Bobby thought of him as a friend. Bobby christened one of his children Maxwell Taylor Kennedy. He was a mole.
Of this one, so you got a whole line of this same name.
Sorry. Anyway, I'm going to quote, in Dallas 63, Taylor commissioned a third Northwoods, which would be a false flag attack, which would justify an attack on Cuba. And I'll just read you the last sentence of it. This is Taylor. The United States should intervene militarily in Cuba and could, A, engineer provocative incidents ostensibly perpetrated by the Castro regime, or B, foment a revolt in Cuba. And this was so blatantly, it was circulated inside the Pentagon, and gives you an idea of just how anti-Kennedy the Pentagon was at this time, that they could safely circulate within the Pentagon a document that was in flagrant, I say in my comment here, insurrectionary opposition to what Kennedy was trying to do to end the Cold War. So we come back to the ideas of right and left inside government, which I think is really crucial here. And in that period, COG has been consistently on the side of the people who want to maintain the Cold War. And if somebody like Kennedy threatens to end the dominance of the petrodollar, then they will step in to end it. And I'm going to come quickly to the end of my thing. What becomes very important in my paper is who was the CIA agent who went out to speak to Richard Kane before Richard Kane was going to falsely blame Paulino Sierra. Do I need to explain more about who Paulino Sierra was? I did.
So.
Eh?
I don't think everybody knows who he is.
Well, I will say, first of all, I learned about him from the last of the House Committee on Assassination staff reports, number 10. It was very thin, and it was really very exciting to me. And it described this man, Paulino Sierra, who was getting money, it said in the thing, getting money from the organized crime. I've always been interested in organized crime, and was promising a new revolution with all these, the worst groups, Alpha 66, SNFE, you name them, or including, I think, the DRE. He was not getting money from organized crime. All the money was handled by his employer, who was a man working for the United Tank Car Company, which was, those of you who know the history of the Rockefellers, was the part of the Rockefeller empire that established the monopoly, because all kinds of people were drilling for oil, but there was only one company that supplied the tank cars. And so that the Rockefellers grew very, very rich and monopolists and the Standard Oil monopoly was, the core of it was United Tank Car Company. I don't think that's particularly relevant here, but it is relevant that that the man that Sierra was working with to create this junta was not being financed by the mob. In fact, this man, do you remember his name, Max? His employer?
Austin Hone, is this?
No, Sierra Martinez's employer. I have it here in my paper, but I'm not going to bother. What matters is that he was I spent hours with both of them. He's a conservative Republican, strictly legal guy who later went on to chair the Chicago Crime Commission. In other words, not an organized crime figure at all. And it was they who reported to the FBI that organized crime was trying to push money at Sierra, and according to my American friend here, I call him a friend, I spent so many hours with both of them, that they rejected the funds. So it becomes, and I'm very near the end now, who was the CIA guy who flew out from Langley to consult with Kane? And I'll jump to the very end of my paper and read you footnote 114. Where are we? Here we are. Is this right? No, it's not right. See, my eyes are so bad. Excuse me. I called him H in the paper, but at the end, oh, thank you, Max. I'll read you a paragraph and then the footnote. Available CIA and FBI files on Sierra suggest that through 1963, both agencies, that's the CIA, Task Force W and also don't worry about that. Both agencies were curious and even suspicious about Sierra's intentions, because essentially what Bobby was using Sierra for was to frustrate what the CIA was trying to do independently. Using at least 2 and perhaps 3 of Hunt's future Watergate burglars, notably Bernard Barker, CIA in Miami, observed Sierra closely. Then, on August the 19th, 1963, a man I shall call H, a member of the CIA HQ's SAS staff, flew to Chicago for a meeting he had requested with Richard Kane and the head of the local CIA Domestic Contact Service. Now, if you've read my article, you're going to be very curious at this point who that man was, and the footnote says, Lamar Waldron reports that notations on one of the Richard Kane files, Ray Chicago, quote, show that it was sent to Desmond Fitzgerald's deputy and to the CIA staffer, that's all in SAS, who handled key Mexico City cables about Oswald. And that's, I give the citation. And then this is me commenting on that statement by Waldron, who doesn't identify, it just gives you a description of him. And I claim, and I had a better mind then than I do now, before the assassination, the only staffer on Fitzgerald's SAS staff who begins to fit this description is Austin Horn. Now, how many people here have heard of Austin Horn? Okay.
He's the guy.
He's the guy.
I had forgotten I wrote this paper. I dug it out in response to an email that I got early this year, which I forgot to duplicate for you. This is the email that came in. I don't know what you remember about me. It's coming from somebody called Anthony Horn, and he identifies himself as the grandson of Austin Horn. I don't know what you remember about my grandfather. I saw something online about him being maybe another operative. He was not. But I have been thwarted by the U.S. government to get any information on his death. I know he played a big role in, oh, jeepers. He played a big role in South Florida with the Cuban issues. I also know and have seen documentation that he interviewed Oswald in Miami during an FBI-CIA joint task force for Cuba just before Kennedy was killed. Now, he was told that. That doesn't mean it's true, but it's interesting that he was told that. My family had a 2-year gag order after he was killed in Indonesia on a sanctioned CIA hunt. It was a hunting expedition. Those of you who know the fate of William Sullivan will be interested in this, with a man who they were trying to turn, and he was shot in the head by the man. There were several people there. I don't know who they are. We were never to speak of it. He never received the star he deserves to this day. Then an agent kills himself over stress in the 90s, I believe, and get a star, and his grandfather didn't get a star. I never was able to meet this infamous man who did secret missions in NAM and then CIA. He was not just a small player. That says what a nice grandfather he was. I won't read that part. So the fact that his death was covered up, Max did some research on this. The cover story was put out that it was an accident, but he was told inside when they were told they were not to speak about it. That's the famous negative template. You know, when they're covering something up, you know that there's something important there. So I think that Austin. I do also mention him briefly in Dallas 63 as one of the people who we should look at closely. But I didn't know what I wrote. I'd forgotten about my paper when I wrote Dallas 63. So anyway, it's all there. And to come back now to John's paper, I think it's very important that we realize we can worry about head snaps and all that sort of thing, but the large picture is not just something about the Kennedy assassination. It's about a presence in our government that intrudes at moments of great crisis, and presidents go down. Nixon went down because of Watergate. McCord was deeply implicated in Watergate, and I came with a lot of stuff I was going to say about that, but that's a bit off to one side here now. And it came up in, as I already mentioned, in Iran-Contra, and it was central, absolutely central to 9/11. And it's still with us. And in fact, George Bush Jr. Made some updates in 2007, and a congressional committee wanted to see the updates, and they weren't allowed to see the updates because they didn't have the classifications to see anything at all about COG. And remind you again, the question was asked, was this a conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. government? It was a question so sensitive that Oliver North was not allowed to answer that question. Again, when there's cover-up, there's something important there. So I just want to establish a bit of perspective here when we go back to John's paper.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who are these people deciding that the president doesn't have the clearance to see documents? Who makes that?
Well, no, I didn't say about the president. I said about the chair of the House Intelligence Committee.
Okay, so that could...
Said he didn't have the clearance.
Yeah, but the person who succeeded Dulles was a Republican, and they didn't tell him a
McComb.
whole bunch of things.
And they told him a bunch of things that weren't true.
Yeah.
I think that when you're talking about McComb, when McComb came out
McComb, exactly.
Well, when McComb came out to see Bobby Kennedy on the afternoon of November 22nd, immediately afterwards, Bobby called in Ruiz Williams, who I'm talking here. He's the channel through whom Bobby was giving instructions to Paulino Sierra. And he was called in by Bobby in the presence of a very honest Washington Post reporter. So it's not a single source here. He said to this man, "One of your boys did it." And he said that because he had just been told. What would he know apart from what McCone had told him? That had to come from McCone, and this explains the extreme reluctance of the Kennedys ever since to, well, as long as they were public figures, to go to the assassination. I think it is true that one of their boys did it, because one of their boys here means all these terrible Cubans that they were trying to get out of the country. And when Jack Anderson in '67 was the first to raise this horrible idea that plans to kill Castro backfired and were used against Kennedy, which I think is on to something. I think we should hang on to that as something worth pursuing. And I knew it because I read the Jack Anderson column in the San Francisco Chronicle. But people in Washington, they saw all this stuff about, but it didn't come back to, the headline and the story didn't meld because the crucial part of the story was not reproduced in Washington, and the person who got it killed was not somebody in the CIA. No, it was Bobby Kennedy. He was good friends with, you've seen the movie from All the President's Men. Bobby Kennedy got that part that the thing had backfired against President Kennedy, which would, of course, embarrass Bobby because these were one of Ruiz Williams' people. And then there was, all through the leading up to Watergate, Jack Anderson was sort of taunting Nixon with the Bay of Pigs thing idea that the Bay of Pigs had something to do, and there was a guy inside a cop inside the Nixon White House who said, "Don't go there. There's too much would be laid public if you went there." They did go there, and we got Watergate. What was Watergate? People think Watergate was all those hearings. That was never about why they went in and planted a bug in the first place. The bug, that what we call Maxie Wells's bug, was very sensitive because it linked to a kind of Jeffrey Epstein operation where call girls were sleeping with all the politicians in New York, and the CIA was recording it. And this, I'm not going to quote it, but Hogan in his book links it to a very special network that linked up all the things. That's the COG network of that time. But McCord himself was working for the alternative government thing. That was my public reason for years to link Watergate to COG, but it was much more intimate than that. I'm talking too much. More questions? Yeah.
You mentioned, and I've read it before, that Bobby told Harry Ruiz Williams, that one of your guys did it.
Yeah.
Now, Ruiz Williams had a relationship with Paulino Sierra, and that's not clear to me, nor is Sierra's relationship to Bobby clear to me.
When phone calls would come in to Paulino, which he would take in the presence of his sort of American handler, I'll give you the name later, and he never identified himself, but the understanding was that it was Ruiz Williams. I corroborated long ago, I don't know in which book, that this really was Ruiz Williams acting for Kennedy, because in the Schlesinger biography of Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, there's a notice of a meeting that Bobby Kennedy set up with Crimmins, and maybe I've got the details wrong, but I think it was for Crimmins to meet with Paulino Sierra. And whatever it was an absolute surefire corroboration that Paulino Sierra's Browder, William Browder, he was the American, that their version of events they gave to me over and over and over. I spent a day drinking, what are the daiquiris, whatever it is Cubans drink on 8th Avenue in Miami. I spent a whole day getting drunk on those with Paulino. It was always the same story. And well, I think that's the answer. Because of what was in the Schlesinger biography, assuming that the document was not a fake, yes.
Well, I'm searching for context here, because Batista was the man for Sierra, was he not? Wasn't Sierra Batista?
He was a Batistiano, yes, but Batista wasn't in the picture anymore. It defined Sierra's politics. They were very right-wing. They were.
Why would they work with Bobby? Why were Bobby and Sierra in the same orbit? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, Sierra was a public-minded guy. What he had done for a whole year was work to try and find jobs for Cuban lawyers who had left Cuba and were now unemployed. And he was ahead, he was being paid to find jobs for these people. In other words, doing a public service. And so he was tapped, and he did a good job. And he's a nice guy. I liked him. I can like Batistianos if they're nice guys. He was a nice guy. So that they tapped him to do it. And I think it was important that he was right-wing because all the people he was trying to get were right-wing. You know, if they've got somebody who was thought more like Bobby Kennedy, people like Alpha 66 wouldn't have listened to him.
Well, I'm still missing a thread then, because I'm trying to put Sierra in the killing of JFK.
No, nothing to do with killing JFK, getting blamed for, his name was blackened, and there you bring in Richard Lauchley, Minuteman. It's a bunch of right-wingers who spread this rumor. Oh, there's an informant called Mosley, I forgot. It's all in my paper here. Mm-hmm. Thomas Mosley was was an informant who told the Secret Service that he had heard that Sierra had said, now we've taken care of Kennedy, we're set to go back into Cuba, our new backers are Jews. And that is the thing that was predicted by Joseph Miltier. I don't know why people haven't taken Miltier more seriously. The FBI, again, you know, by the principle of the negative template, Hoover worked so hard on destroying the Miltier story by countering it by other informant stories that it got more and more muddied, more and more complicated. But on the surface of it, a man who accurately predicts three things. He predicted the sharpshooter from a high window. He predicted that the guy would immediately be killed. And he predicted that there would be this campaign to blame it on the Jews. Why wasn't that taken seriously? I went to a conference of experts for the House Committee where we were to meet Blakey, and suddenly that same day Frank Sturgis, alias Frank Fiorini, with his woman friend Marita Lorenz, they held a press conference in New York, and so Blakey was called out of the meeting with us and went to deal with the press conference, and he said, well, I'll read your transcript. I doubt he ever did, but I know I've read the transcript of all the experts. How many people were there for that? Tink, you must have been there, weren't you?
Yeah, Tink was there.
Anyone else? This is the older generation here. This is 1977. Anyway, I said you should look into the activities of the Army Intelligence Reserve Unit in Dallas, which was headed by John Crichton, and had the number 2 man was William Lumpkin, who's a key man in the Dallas police. Half the Dallas police force were members of this I'm not sure if they were members of the John Birch Society or members of this unit, but there was a high percentage was true of both. So do please look into Crichton and Lumpkin, and I think I may have mentioned Brandstetter, and I'm the only person who mentioned it. And but I think I was right to mention it.